What have been the worst AFL trades of all time? Well, let's start with Fremantle in 1994. In the first ever trade period, they had an absolute stinker. Now, Andrew McLeod was set to join the Dockers in 1995. We all know how Andrew McLeod did in his career, one of the greatest Indigenous players, one of the greatest players of all time. But the Fremantle coach at the time, Gerard Neesham, thought that McLeod had an attitude problem. And thus, a deal with Adelaide was done, and McLeod ended up going to Adelaide. Now, the player Fremantle got instead was a player called Chris Groom, who played 5 games for Fremantle and was delisted. What's even worse for Fremantle fans is in 1994, they thought they got the best deal of their lives when they pulled out Tony Delaney and Todd Ridley out west. The Dockers gave up a pick 4 and a compensation pick, which resulted in Essendon getting Matthew Lloyd and Scott Lucas. I think combined is around 1,400 goals, which is just one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life. In addition, everything seems to be Fremantle here. In 2001, Fremantle exchanged pick 1 for Luke McFarlane and Trent Crode, who were good players at Fremantle. But that pick 1 ended up being Luke Hodge, arguably the greatest defender, or one of the best defenders of all time. Another terrible trade. How about the Josh Kennedy trade, father-son to Hawthorn, and in 2009 he moves to Sydney. They traded him for pick 39, which Hawthorn ended up using on a guy called Sam Grimley, who played only 3 games. And Josh Kennedy, we all know what he did at the Sydney Football Club, ended up being one of the greatest midfielders in their time, one of the best inside, and one of the start of a new type of midfielder who his contested possession abilities were out of this world. My club, Richmond, has had some absolute terrible trades. I mean, not even trades. If you look about the draft, they took Richard Tambling instead of Buddy fucking Franklin. But anyway, let's talk about trades only. In 2004, one of the sort of promising rucks of that time, Brad Ottens, Richmond decided to ship him off to Geelong in exchange for 2 first-round draft picks. Now, it sounds like a good deal, but the 2 first-round picks Richmond chose were Danny Meyer and Adam Patterson. Now, Meyer only played 16 games, Patterson played 61, which is pretty good. But Ottens played over 100 games with Geelong, won them 3 flags as well, playing some of the best games in that time period and very much helping them win those flags. Or what about Brendan Favola, who was a star at Carlton, one of their best forwards ever. But there was a little bit of attitude problems, behavioural issues, and subsequently he was traded to Brisbane in 2010. A good trade for Carlton, but terrible for Brisbane. Now, Brisbane actually ended up getting rid of Daniel Bradshaw and Michael Riscatelli in efforts to get him to the club. Well, that's what they thought. In the end, Brisbane actually only ended up giving the Blues pick 12 and Lockie Henderson. Lockie Henderson was a very consistent defender for a number of years at Carlton, and Fev played 1 season at the Gabba, and he was sacked in the 2010 off-season. So one of the worst trades, and one to forget for Brisbane. Or how about Richmond, who sent fucking pick 19 to the Dogs to get Jordan McMahon to the club. Now, Jordan McMahon, fucking hell. I mean, we'll start with the Dogs. They used that pick 19 that Richmond gave to the Dogs to get Callan Ward, who was a great servant for them, and has continued to be brilliant at the GWS Giants. And big old Jordan over here only played 34 games for the Tigers. What an absolute fucking L. Now, this trade is actually a lot more interesting than what it first seems like. Jordan McMahon was very, very key for the Dustin Martin trade. Now, Richmond and Melbourne, for that matter, were terrible for a long period of time, but there was a game in 2009 where McMahon kicked a goal after the siren, and subsequently Melbourne finished last. And you know what, from that goal, the fact Melbourne finished last, they got pick number 1 and 2 in the 2010 draft, or 2009 draft. And then in pick number 3, the Tigs took Dustin Martin. Now, if McMahon didn't kick that goal, there's every chance, if not 100% chance, that Dustin Martin would have ended up at the D's or elsewhere. Or how about Josh Gibson, who went from the North Melbourne Football Club to Hawthorn, where he won 3 premierships, was one of the best defenders in that generation, and North Melbourne only received 2 mid-round draft picks. One of them was Aaron Black, who played alright, but the other was a guy called Aidan Kennedy, who did fuck all. One of the many fails that North Melbourne have had in the trade period. A bit of an interesting one here, there was a trade between North Melbourne and Adelaide regarding Wayne Carey. Now, after, you know, he cheated on his mate's wife, Carey took a year away from the game and then said, fuck it. Despite being over 30, he thought, you know what, I want to play footy again. So the Crows lined up a trade for him. They sent number 2 and number 18 draft picks to North Melbourne to get Wayne Carey. Now, Wayne Carey only did play 2 seasons, kicking 56 goals after, but North Melbourne did pick Daniel Wells as one of those picks, who played over 250 games, and what a career that guy had. Or how about the trade that could have brought Zach Merritt to the Dogs? Imagine Zach Merritt in that midfield with the Bont, McRae, Libba, Treloar. You can keep going. That midfield is absolutely mental. Now, the reason it didn't happen has to do with the whole drug saga and Stuart Cramery. Now, Cramery was a very good forward for Essendon Essendon, probably their best before the whole drug saga. He wanted out of the club and he wanted to go to the Dogs, so the Dogs coughed up pick 26 in the 2013 draft. And that pick was used to get Zach Merritt, who has eventuated to be the captain of Essendon, one of Essendon's best players for the last 5 years, and probably one of Essendon's best players for the next 10 years. He will be a star. If he stays at Essendon, he'll be an all-time club great, and that's a trade that the Dogs will unfortunately be fucking hating. Some more terrible trades for my club, Richmond. They picked up Jay Schultz from our club in 2009 for Mitch Farmer and pick 71, which the Tigers used on Ben Nason, who was alright for us. Schultz only kicked 58 goals in 7 seasons for the Tigs. He goes to Port Adelaide in 5 seasons, kicks over 200. So very, very bad trade for us. Equally for Port Adelaide, they had a terrible trade. They traded Tom Harley to Geelong for pick 37. Harley only managed 1 game for Port Adelaide at the time, so didn't seem like the worst trade then, but what eventuated was Harley to play just under 200 games, 2 premierships, all Australians. I mean, leadership, one of the best players for Geelong in that time period during the Flags. Different setup now. Look, the video wasn't quite long enough, so I'm going to be adding a couple more trades. In 2016, Toby Nankervis was traded from Sydney to the Richmond Tigers. Now, this trade involved a pick 46 going to Sydney, and subsequently Richmond got Toby Nankervis. Now, Toby Nankervis ends up being one of Richmond's most influential players for the three-peat. Well, not three-peat, but the 3 Flags Richmond won. Toby Nankervis was the sole ruck, and it looks to be one of the best steals in Richmond's history, and Sydney will be wondering, especially for the last 5 years, has not had a conclusively, elite #1 ruck. They'll be wondering why they got rid of him. Now, there's another series on my channel where I basically go through some old trade periods and grade every single trade. Now, I was recording yesterday. In 2018, there was a trade between Gold Coast and Hawthorn regarding Jack Scrimshaw. Now, Jack Scrimshaw was a very highly touted draft prospect, went in the top 10 in his particular draft. Gold Coast thought, you know what, let's get rid of him. And the trade is Gold Coast got a 2019 future 3rd round draft pick for Scrimshaw and the future 4th rounder. So Hawthorn not only give up a future round 3rd, which is not much different to what they got, which is a future round 4. So effectively they've given up nothing. They've basically got Jack Scrimshaw for free. And Scrimshaw to the date has played around 80 games for Hawthorn. He's been a mainstay there. He is a very impressive young player, and Gold Coast have, been involved once again in one of the worst trades in history. And from all these grading videos that I've done, there are a lot of trades involving the likes of Josh Shackey, Rory Lobb, and Jesse Hogan, none of which have ended well apart from Hogan going from Fremantle to GWS. So if you want to look at the worst trades ever, just look at the history of Josh Shackey going to Brisbane to Dogs and Dogs to Melbourne, Jesse Hogan for that initial trade from Melbourne to Fremantle, and then Rory Lobb going from GWS to Fremantle and Fremantle to the Dogs, all of which have been fails. Now there are many more trades that are great, that are terrible, etc, etc. We can even go Jamie Cripps, who went to the Eagles from St Kilda for only pick 40 and 43. And Jamie Cripps, premiership player, one of the most consistent forwards in the competition for the last 10 years. Jack Crisp going from Brisbane to Collingwood for next to nothing. I mean, even recently, 2020, Nick Hind going to Essendon from St Kilda for next to nothing. Like, there's obviously a million different trades you can choose from, but they're just some of the ones I've gone through. Let me know what the worst trade out of those is in the comments. Make sure you follow the TikTok FTFooty, like, subscribe, follow for more, and I'll see you in another video.